Hello, and welcome back to the Perimenopause Revolution Summit. I am beyond thrilled and honored to welcome our next guest, Dr. Elina Berglund. She is the creator and founder of the Natural Cycles app, which is an app that I've been using to track my own fertility cycles and do my own family planning for the last many, many years. And as some of you know, I'm a mom of 4 under the age of 12. So it has been instrumental in our family planning. And yes, all 4 of those babies were intended. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. Berglund and a little bit more about the app, and then we're going to dive into really understanding the science behind the app creation and, what is sort of fertility awareness, what is cycle tracking, what is it all about, how it is actually something that's quite scientific and not just, for people in long skirts and Birkenstocks, which I think is how it has been characterized in the past. So we're going to change your mind about that. And I'm just so excited to share this information with you and really to share with you something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is all about giving health information back to the people it belongs to, which is, in this case, women. So without further ado, Elina Berglund, she's a particle physicist turned entrepreneur. I've never said that sentence before, so that's really exciting. And she's the founder of Natural Cycles. After working on the Nobel Prize winning Higgs-boson discovery, she applied her scientific expertise to create Natural Cycles, the first FDA-cleared birth control app. Elina's mission is to empower women with a natural hormone-free alternative for family planning and to provide them with greater control over their reproductive health. And like I said, it's my favorite app for tracking my cycle and fertility. And also, we're going to talk about this today, but for really tracking and understanding sort of the changes and behaviors of my cycle as I'm aging and going through perimenopause. It's really contraception built around you. Again, it's FDA cleared, which is completely unique and different from any other cycle tracking app. It's non-hormonal and non-invasive. And I know that so many women are really looking for those types of solution. I believe tracking your cycle, especially in perimenopause, is of the utmost importance. And in fact, every time someone walks into my office, one of the first questions that I ask them is, what cycle day are you on? Cycle tracking gives you a picture of your health and into your hormonal status and assists in preventing and planning pregnancy across the menstrual lifespan, which many women are still able to get pregnant during perimenopause. So we're so lucky to have you today. And without further ado, I've been talking way too much. Welcome, Dr. Elina.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I'm such a fan, as you know, and I'm so excited to kind of get behind the scenes a little bit in terms of, how this all came to be. So would you mind sharing a little bit about sort of your personal relationship to cycle tracking and tell us the story, the origin story? Like, when were you like, light bulb, this is what I'm going to put my energy into?
Sure, I'd love to. And I guess it started a very long time ago. As a teenager, I was struggling I was put on the pill, the hormonal birth control pill, and it really changed my mood, and I was struggling, and I was trying to find a different solutions. I went to the library and tried to read up about how to track my cycle and understand when I'm fertile or not. But this was way too complicated, and I ended up on the hormonal implant for 10 years. And then 10 years later, I had just discovered the Higgs particle, as you mentioned, a huge discovery at CERN, the particle accelerator, which did lead to the Nobel Prize. And I was then a scientist, and I was, it was a lot about data and algorithms and understanding the ins and outs of statistical methods and AI. And it was time to take out my hormonal implant. And, I knew we wanted to have children in a few years. I didn't want to put in a new one. I didn't want to go back to the pill in the meantime. I wanted to give my body a break from hormones during this time before getting ready to get pregnant. So again, I was thinking, okay, but what kind of solutions are there? And now as a scientist and having access to all scientific articles, I realized that the temperature changes throughout the menstrual cycle. It increases after ovulation due to the progesterone in your body. And that's something that's well known and well studied, but women used to do this by hand with very simple rules. So it wasn't a very effective method of birth control. But I thought, well, I can create an algorithm that takes previous cycles into account, fluctuations in temperature into account, fever into account, coming off hormonal birth control into account. And that's kind of how it started. And quickly we realized, me and my also physicist co-founder, my husband, that this is a huge unmet need. Like so many of our female colleagues or wives of our male colleagues, they also wanted to do this, and they gave us the data so we could like train the algorithm and they could use it even before the app was out. And you know that you can also use it the other way around. You can use it to plan a pregnancy when you're ready. So we quit our jobs in physics, and you know, it's now been 12 years since we started creating this algorithm, and now Natural Cycles is an app used by millions of women worldwide. So we've come a long way.
Wow. Yeah, it's so amazing. And I love the story because, again, I think that there's still in some circles this idea that like only certain types of people are interested in that type of method, right? That, you know, the feminist movement in large part was centered around access to birth control. And so there was sort of this loss of knowledge, right? That has always been there. And you've just put it into a system that is so simplified and also reliable. So talk a little bit about that, because I'm sure that people who aren't familiar with this are saying, like, how is that? Like, I've literally heard stories about that. That's the rhythm method and that doesn't work. Like, speak to that for me.
Yeah, and Natural Cycles is definitely very different than the rhythm method. We measure a woman's temperature either by sleeping with a wearable like a ring or a smartwatch, or by taking your temperature when you wake up in the morning in the mouth. And with this data, we can then establish when ovulation happens. So it's no guesswork involved, and no need for the woman to read a book or take a course to learn about how to track her own biomarkers. We do that for her in the app by our algorithm. And then we return a fertility status of the day. So if you use it for birth control, then it's a green day if you're definitely not fertile, and a red day if you are fertile or might be fertile, so you need to use protection to avoid pregnancy. And if you use it the other way around to plan pregnancy, the algorithm is slightly different, and we then highlight like what are your most fertile days of the cycle, so really those that you have a higher likelihood of conception.
So how many days per month in a typical woman's cycle is she able to get pregnant?
So the fertile window is 6 days per cycle. So ovulation day and the 5 days before, because the sperm can survive up to 5 days. But it's really only 3 days where you have a high likelihood of getting pregnant. So ovulation day and the 2 days before. So indeed, like it's funny how nature works. Like if you want to get pregnant, you should really find those 3 days. But if you want to avoid pregnancy, you have to avoid all the 6 days, because you want this to be an effective method of contraception. And indeed, Natural Cycles, we've now published, I think, 22 clinical studies together with like leading experts in the field. And we several of those is about the effectiveness of the method. And this has also been validated by regulators like the FDA, also in Europe and Canada and Australia, we're cleared as a birth control method. And it's then 93% effective with typical use. So that includes all pregnancy, any type, like even if you don't use protection on those red days, or 98% effective with perfect use, which means that you actually use protection when the app tells you it's a red day and you're fertile.
So like if the person's using a barrier method, like a condom or a diaphragm on the days when it's red, then it's 98% effective?
Yes.
Wow. And how does that compare to the hormonal methods that are on the market currently?
So the pill is also 93% effective with typical use, and 99% effective with perfect use. But Natural Cycles is more effective than, say, using condoms alone or other fertility awareness methods, but less effective than methods like the IUD or the hormonal implants that is inside your body. You can completely forget about it.
Right. So there's some user interaction, but I think I would argue to say that it's about the same amount of time per day that you're spending as if you were taking a pill, right?
Yeah.
And I think the gift of doing something like this is that, well, number one, we all like to interact with technology. Like I love to look at all of my data and my stats and, kind of have this daily feedback on what's going on. But, I think it does develop, a certain different level of relationship with the self. And I would just be curious, like, do you have any kind of anecdotes, or was there something that you learned about the gifts with this app and how it changed people's relationship that you really weren't anticipating when you got started?
Well, I would say that's still to me the biggest motivation of what I do every day is to read the feedback from our users, because like for instance, we read all the app reviews and other feedback, and usually what the app reviews talk about is not actually the app itself, but it is how they feel so empowered by understanding what's going on inside their bodies, and that has really deliberating them. That plus the fact that they don't have to use hormonal contraception. So many of our users, they've experienced side effects in the past, and they haven't found a birth control method that suits them. And they feel very free and empowered by natural cycles, that they don't have to be on the pill. And in exchange, they get all this knowledge about their bodies.
Yeah. And I think for so many college girls, I mean, I remember when I was in college many years ago, that the sort of feeling, and there was also this social pressure of like, you're irresponsible if you're not on a birth control method, like a hormonal method. That was just the general feeling. And then when I went to graduate school and even undergraduate school, and I studied nursing and then, advanced practice nursing, that was still kind of the general culture, was that, to encourage compliance, and that, it was kind of irresponsible. Like it was kind of like taking a drink from a stranger. Like if you're taking drinks from strangers and you're not taking birth control, like those are the two biggest things that you're doing to put yourself at risk. Like, and those are just really not one and the same. And I think now, with young women in college in particular, having so much access to technology and to information, like I foresee even my 12-year-old as being someone who's mature enough to take in this information and translate it into action. Now, she's not trying to prevent or plan pregnancy, of course, yet, but just in terms of like the usability and the user experience, I think that it has broad reach. And I'm sure that you've seen that. Like, what is the typical age range? Like, how wide does it get in terms of people using the app?
So natural cycles is cleared as a birth control method from the age of 18, because we have not performed any clinical studies for girls below 18. So you do have to be 18. But then it ranges up to, menopause essentially, right? And the average new user is around 30 years old, because often we see that women, they're often put on hormonal birth control. They maybe struggle with it, or they're thinking about what is this doing to my body if I want to have kids? And then they get off it, and they often, like my own story, need another solution. And then they find natural cycles. But I think it's very right what you say. And from working in women's health now for 12 years, I realized that society is often not comfortable with women being in control of their own bodies. It feels more comfortable, like, okay, if you're on the pill, it's controlled by the pill. But here, women are really in control themselves. And we see that also in our data that, for instance, the women that are between 18 and 25, they're actually very good at preventing pregnancy. They have an even better effectiveness rate than the women that are, say, like 30 to 35, because they're in control, and they're maybe thinking like, yeah, I'm okay with getting pregnant now, so maybe I'm not as compliant on those red days, because I'm ready to have a child soon, and I'm in a stable relationship. Well, the younger women, they're actually great at compliance. So I do feel that women can be trusted with their own bodies and making sound decisions with the right knowledge.
And I just feel like that's the message that women want to hear, is like, hey, guess what? Number one, we think that you are capable of like listening to your body and interpreting this information and putting it into action. And also, like, we believe you and we trust you. you know, and I think that we've been kind of gaslit for a long time that that wasn't possible. How many cycles does someone need to monitor for before they have really good kind of estimates about their fertile window?
So the algorithm always errs on the side of caution. So before it has enough data, or if you forget to measure, or you have a very irregular cycle, you get more red days. So it's very personalized to you. We usually say like it takes maybe 3 cycles to ramp up to get like a significant amount of green days. However, now most of our new users use a wearable, and they've often used it before. So then we take historical data into account. So then it's from day one, essentially, because we have their past temperature data from the wearable.
Wow, I love that so much. Tell me a little bit about, like, can you define the symptothermal method, like rhythm method, just kind of like baseline? Let's sort of explain why this is different.
Yeah, so there are calendar methods, or the rhythm method that is purely based on periods. So that then you don't measure anything. So you just purely guess that ovulation happens somewhere in the middle of your cycle. And we've published a study that actually looks at the cycle, because it's women's health so under research and underfunded. So we want to give back in terms of our research. And there we see that, you know, this 28-day cycle where you ovulate on day 14, that actually only happens 13% of the time. Like, women have all sorts of cycles, and you ovulate some later, some earlier, and no cycle is perfectly regular. So it's important to measure ovulation and have a proper algorithm that takes all kinds of uncertainties into account. And we've also published a different study that compares natural cycles to 2 different calendar methods, so the standard days method and the rhythm method, and shows that, you know, the effectiveness is much higher, but also you get more green days, because since you don't know when ovulation happened, you have to put a very wide number of like days you have to use protection. The symptothermal method uses both temperature and you tracking cervical mucus yourself. And that usually involves either like a 3-month course or reading a big book. So we decided that we want to take the human error out and the guesswork out. So you can track cervical mucus in the Natural Cycles app, but we don't give green days based on it, because again, we want to err on the side of caution.
Right, because it can be so, like, women's interpretation of their cervical mucus is really variable.
It's difficult, and it's a lot of rules to keep in mind and comply with. Like, for instance, if you have intercourse one day, you then cannot have it the next day, because that affects your cervical mucus. It's a sperm, it's a cervical mucus. This is one of many, many rules that makes it quite complicated. That said, if women also want to track their cervical mucus and get to know their bodies even more, that's great. And we also provide, we have blog articles around it, and we provide education around it, but we still don't give any green days based on that data.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So if you have the average new user at age 30 and you've been around for 12 years, and I'm sure you have lots of new users that are later into their 30s and even early 40s. I know all of my clients in their 40s are probably new users. You probably have a lot of information now about what happens as, you know, the HPO axis is starting to decline. So, like, what are you guys talking about behind the scenes? I'd love to know about sort of hormone decline and perimenopause and how that fits into all of this.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting subject. And, you know, indeed, like, one of our most common requests from our users is like, oh, I want to learn more about my body going through perimenopause. I want a perimenopause mode. And we've had that on our roadmap for quite a few years, but now we've actually started working on it, which is very exciting, because our goal is to provide women with support from like puberty until menopause. And we have today the birth control mode, the planned pregnancy, monitor pregnancy, and also since May postpartum. But perimenopause is really the mode that is missing and the next thing that we will release. So we hope that at some point in spring, summer next year, to have a perimenopause mode that you can use to track this long journey as you go through perimenopause transition. Because we see in our data, like, you know, how the cycle changes, the follicular phase gets shorter, it gets more irregular, you get more anovulatory cycles. So we think following a woman's cycle over time, combined with the symptoms she's experiences, can put us in a unique position to help this woman understand what's going on. Where is she in this perimenopausal journey? Also, how can she handle her symptoms better? And what can she expect of the future? And it's also an area where, again, there's so much lack of education and information. And, you know, doctors are not always comfortable talking about menopause, and there's still a stigma around it that we feel like this is something we have to tackle and change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you've done such a good job of giving back power around all of these other reproductive aspects and area of our lives. And yet for so many people, perimenopause feels like this vast unknown, and women don't really know when they're in it, because from a clinical perspective, like the medical societies don't have really clear diagnostic criteria. There's no one test that says you're in perimenopause or you're not. It's really kind of a, you know, symptoms are the only way that we're coming up with that. And there's a lot of other things that can cause similar symptoms, which of course we're talking about ad nauseum in this summit, right? It's kind of what the mission is of the summit, is to really put a lot of that information out there. One of the things that I love about the app is that as you use it, it is pushing education to you, personalized to kind of what's going on. So like if you're around ovulation, it's going to educate you about ovulation. What are some of the topics that have kind of top of mind? And, you know, I don't know if you probably can't give us all the information, but what are some of the ways that you plan to educate or hope to educate around hormone decline in this perimenopausal transition?
I think first of all, we have to bring it down to the basics, so to understand what's going on, what is happening, and what can I expect. Because I think the average woman, she's not very well educated around perimenopause. And like personally, I mean, I work in women's health and I am seeking out information, but all I knew was that's something that's going to happen at some point. And my mom told me about hot flashes, but there's no other information that's been pushed to me. So really understanding and explaining to women what's happening, like as your ovarian reserve depletes and your estrogen level starts fluctuating, this is what can then cause certain symptoms. But also I think what's important is to try to frame it in a more positive light. Like this is not the end of the world. Every woman goes through that. And even though it can definitely be a tough time, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it is normal. And this is what you can do to alleviate symptoms.
Yeah, I think that that's right on. And just like how in general, like periods, right? Periods were this sort of mythical, like I experience it and like that's all we talk about, but no one, you know, I think most women have to be educated on the fact that like the period's one little part. The cycle's always happening, and that education is so impactful. And the same thing with perimenopause. It's like you may have a sleepless night or a day when you feel extreme PMS, and that's not perimenopause. It's like perimenopause is this journey that's happening all of the time. And I think women in general tend to just feel better when they feel like they have knowledge. Like I can weather this storm because I'm informed, right? So I think that that's awesome. Have you guys thought about, you know, any other data points, like besides temperature, in terms of like bringing into the algorithm, or like maybe even future casting down the line, what other things you're curious about in terms of bringing this whole like sort of assessment picture about sort of what's happening inside on a hormonal level?
Yeah, so we're actually already today using more biomarkers than just temperature, even though temperature is kind of like our North Star. We, for instance, use temperature from, heart rate from the wearable to assess, for instance, if you had a few glasses of wine or if you're stressed, you show it more in the heart rate than the temperature. And then we use that heart rate information to kind of clean out the signal from the temperature. And that's also why we waited with perimenopause until we've gone through this transitioning of using wearable data, because we feel like wearables will be crucial for the perimenopause experience, because then you have more continuous data with heart rate, with temperature. We're discussing with Aura right now, like what we can do together in terms of perimenopause, because it's also an area that they're interested in investing more in, and how we can create algorithms with that wearable data. But we also plan to indeed collect more qualitative symptom data from the women in the app as well. We've noticed that women like tracking things, and then we want to give information back based on what data they put in terms of their symptom as well.
Yeah. How do you find that having all of this information is sort of changing the clinician-patient relationship? And also, like, I mean, for me, if I was you, that would certainly be a part of my mission, probably because I've lived in that world for so long, and I see how much space there is for sort of optimizing and improving the way that we deliver and experience healthcare. But I just wonder anecdotally and from your users, how you see that has impacted people thus far in terms of their relationship with their clinicians, and, how that might tie into your mission.
Yeah, we get quite a lot of feedback from our users around this, and we want to be supportive there too. So we're actually right now also working on a feature where it's easier for the user to share back data to their clinician. And we know that some are open to taking in that data and like have the time to look over the cycle and how it's changing and the symptoms, while some don't have time at all. So I think we're getting there, and we hope for a future where there is more time per patient for clinicians, but we understand it's not always the case. So at least what we can do is provide a platform where it's as easy and convenient as possible to share that data with them.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, as a provider myself, I love when we were seeing this so much with CGM data right now, that we're looking at blood sugar a lot. And I mean, I think we're at such an early phase in terms of understanding like how much tech is going to become, part of our healthcare experience. And, we laugh, but like the sort of like the Marvel movie or the futuristic movies where there's like these moments where you come into a doctor's office and it's like they just scan you and have all this information. Yes, it's very, futuristic, but there's also like we're kind of getting closer to that in terms of how much we can get all of this real-time data on people. And like it's no longer a time where it's like, one blood draw a year and then like kind of that's all you got. So it's really exciting. And I love that you're really bringing to the forefront, like, this is not just about sort of biohacking and biooptimization that tends to be a very male focused kind of high performance focused vibe. This is like every woman can have this information and, can feel, in control and empowered around her fertility planning. And like, I'm just so excited to see what's to come around perimenopause there, because I think people feel so lost and confused. Do you have people already using the app and are you collecting data on women that are starting to use like either, natural or herbal interventions for their perimenopause or any form of HRT? And because I don't think we don't have information really about like, how long do women continue to ovulate if they start to use HRT in perimenopause? And like, you know what I mean? I think that's just such an interesting space for exploration.
Definitely. We do have some data, but we need more. We need to do more research for sure. Because indeed, that's kind of like the vision we have for a perimenopausal product, is that, you should be able to use it both together with HRT and not. So if you want to instead try other methods to alleviate the symptoms, diet, exercise, supplements, and then I feel like with that product, we will get better data and we can do more research, and then, we can iterate on it as well. Because I do think like it is too much of a black box today. We need, we need more studies.
Yeah. I mean, what we see is that, initially when we're sort of giving low levels of HRT in the beginning, we see that women are still having a significant temperature shift and when they're ovulating on their own. And then at a certain point, if there's enough HRT on board, it will shut down that feedback loop, and women don't get a temperature shift anymore. And exogenous, so like a supplemented progesterone, doesn't raise temperature in the same way that ovulation does. It's just really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, that must also affect how you feel, right? Like whether you still ovulate on HRT or not, that probably is a big difference that should be taken into account in terms of like, dosage and yeah.
Yeah. And I think, so interesting at this point in my clinical career versus say 10, 15 years ago, women are more interested and aware of ovulation. Like they understand that that's a thing that happens, and that's a thing that makes them feel a certain way. And that there's like, I just love sort of the trends on social media around, all of the different kind of vibes and like how women feel. And, and there's a process of like real sort of collaboration and decision making around, do I want to continue to work to try to optimize ovulation, to continue to support that with, lifestyle, maybe nutritional supplements, whatever, or like, am I at the point where I'm okay with, ovulation maybe not being present if the sort of benefits of using supplemental hormones is, outweigh the kind of what I'm losing. And that's just such an interesting, I never learned how to counsel on that in my training, like this sort of process of deciding when women are ready to kind of break up with ovulation. And I mean, this is like a totally new frontier. And one of the first things I learned around cycle awareness way back when was, the focus of the highlight of the cycle is ovulation. And I think Natural Cycles does a really great job of bringing that in. I'm curious, how it's being used for people with cycle abnormalities right now, how you see it on the user side, people who are working through things like PCOS and just other anovulatory things, and how the algorithm works with that, and how people have, what your experience has been seeing that.
Yeah, we definitely have users that appreciate Natural Cycles because it helps them understand, again, what's going on inside. Like, for instance, women with PCOS, many of them with severe PCOS that have maybe, 4 periods a year. So they thought they never ovulate, but actually often they do. And then they can see that. And, that also gives them some sense of hope for the future. We also see like other cases where women use Natural Cycles that have, for instance, hypothyroidism to monitor with the temperature. They see the thyroid, and they see also how it affects their hormones in their cycle. So there are definitely other like benefits that come with Natural Cycles and understanding what's going on inside that maybe we didn't anticipate at first, but it's very, very exciting to see. And also, like, as you say, like ovulation is such a key event in the cycle. And I agree that this, talking about it and working in women's health, we've come a long way, because I remember when we started 12 years ago, I would say most women didn't even know that the hormonal birth control pill suppresses ovulation. They thought, okay, I have my 28-day cycle, I have a super regular cycle, but then, they weren't informed that actually this bleeding is a different type of bleeding that comes from the pill, and you don't ovulate. But now I think education is at a better level.
Yeah, I absolutely. And well, you've been a big part of that. I'm personally so interested, like what has been the most surprising part of this journey for you, from where you set off 12 years ago to where you are today, in terms of what you've learned and how it's gone in directions that you never anticipated?
Well, I think unfortunately is that how I've learned how sensitive and difficult women's health is as an area to innovate in. Like when I started out just as a scientist, only having worked in science, I was maybe a little bit naive and thought like, if you do something innovative, you create a good product that women want and need, and the rest will just work itself out. But I realized that it's kind of a minefield, and this is also, I think, why innovation has been stalling in women's health, because it is such a sensitive, delicate area where I think also because it is so delicate, often companies and decision makers shy away from funding because it's hard to innovate and it comes with risks. But natural cycles is not shying away from it, and we're just attacking it head on. But unfortunately, I now understand why women's health has been underfunded, under research, which I didn't in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think menopause and perimenopause are having such a renaissance around this now, and there's so many new advocates around who are really drawing attention to the fact that they've been underfunded, and only a very small percentage of health GDP is going toward research in these areas. And when we stop ovulating, right, so many health things decline. And that awareness, I think, is really crucial, and that information and knowledge and understanding really does belong to the people. And so in this sort of vein of the democratization of healthcare that I think a lot of people are talking about in a really meaningful way right now, I love that we're bringing attention to the fact that we knew from data before that the less frequently someone ovulates in their life, the more risk they have going forward, right? Their cardiovascular disease risks go up. And yet that hasn't really been extrapolated to cautiousness or consideration in terms of how we treat women with birth control methods, right? We somehow just kind of compartmentalize that. That was really interesting information. Let's put that on the bookshelf. And then like when I was in school, it was, LARCs were all the rage. And so that means long acting reversible contraception. So, IUDs, Nexplanon implants, because they were so innovative, as opposed to just female sterilization or sort of a tubal ligation, which was, it is still one of the most popular forms of birth control, but was used, largely, especially in younger populations and women that had a lot of regret around it. So LARCs were like sort of the solution to that, that now we have this method that, is low risk, and it's reversible. So if someone does change their mind and you say has a new partner 10 years later, they can have babies. And I think the thing that's been so hard is that women feel like they were sold this amazing solution. And now, like, as we're putting things together, and what I'm seeing clinically is like, we know that sort of taking away ovulation for long periods of time, there's some correlation to change in health status. I don't think we know enough from the evidence to say that like birth control causes a change in health status later on, but it's definitely worth investigation. I think that women deserve like for more information to be kind of pulled out there. And yet there's this fear around like this balance in kind of the feminist movement of like, do we give people back their power? Are we giving them back their power by letting them control their fertility with these really effective methods? Or like, are we actually sort of misrepresenting women's health in general in terms of not educating people from a young age? I think that, in middle school, instead of just talking about the mechanics of periods and encouraging them all to wear deodorant, which is essentially what period education is in most middle schools, it really is. I mean, it's quite frankly, like, it's sad. It should be like, this is what happens once you start ovulating, right? This is what a period really means. It's just an endpoint of this whole cycle that's happening. And, healthy lifestyle and healthy habits tend to correlate with healthy menstrual cycles, right? And healthy levels of hormones and healthy ovulation tends to correlate with healthy long-term health, right? And I just wonder, like, have you found yourself at a crossroads at times in your career in this conversation around the importance of ovulation? And, I mean, on the juicy side, I'm just curious if there have been moments where you feel like, wow, I'm up against freaking Mount Everest here. Just me and my sign promoting, healthy cycles and ovulation. I'd like to know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it hasn't always been easy, and that's also a little bit what I mean, that women's health is such a sensitive and delicate topic, and it has been controlled very much by, certain, like pharmaceutical companies like selling a birth control pill, and that's we in the beginning was also a little bit of another minefield to like navigate and see, because we know when it comes to birth control, it's very important to have options, so all women can find a method that suits them, and there's no one size fits all when it comes to birth control. In the beginning, it was hard to find that like navigation, like, we're not against the birth control pill, but we feel it's very important to provide an option, because we do feel, like you say, that many studies have shown that there are significant health risks, and women experience side effects and are often not taken seriously. And I think this has often been swept under the carpet as, oh, but the benefits outweigh the risk. So like, it doesn't matter if you have all these health risks, because, the benefit of birth control is so important. But now there are other options, right? There's the copper IUD, there's natural cycles, and yes, there is still hormonal birth control, and that still fills a very important function. But at least women should have the possibility to get the knowledge of the pros and cons of all the methods in an unbiased way. And I feel like often the health risks and the side effects are almost hidden, because it's like, as you said before, like, no, we want the women to be on the pill. We want them to, the girls, we want them to be controlled by the pill, because having an unwanted pregnancy is the end of the world. And if we can change that, and women can take their own decision, own informed decision based on unbiased facts, and like remove the like feelings and the politics out of it, I think that would be very beneficial to society. And yeah, I have a 10-year-old daughter, so I'm starting to see to navigate this too in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter already knows that when she gets her period, that she's going to have a choice of wearables. That like, to me, that's one of the most important pieces of education I can give her, is just awareness of her body, and knowing that, in her luteal phase, especially, buckle up, 10, my daughter's 12, like, just wait, it gets more complicated. Those hormonal changes feel really severe to them at that age. And they're thinking to themselves, like, I don't know why I'm so emotional at school today, or why what so-and-so said was so, made me feel so sensitive. And if they just have that awareness, like, oh, between days 22 and 28, like, you are more likely to feel more sensitive. You might need some more downtime. That's totally normal and okay. Like, that is so empowering. And, to your point where you were saying, the message that I got as a student and a young clinician was, pregnancy is the biggest risk factor for a woman, period, in her life. That pregnancy as an event carries so many risks. And we also know, giving birth in the United States, it is unfortunately a risky scenario, right? We don't have great maternal health outcomes in the United States around childbirth. However, there was this, I think, unnecessary amount of responsibility placed on the provider, that it was our job to mitigate that risk by taking away the risk of unplanned pregnancy, instead of trusting the woman and saying, even to women of all different sort of walks of life, background, education levels, economic means, like, this is a method that is accessible to all of them, I think. And I don't know if it's something that's covered by Medicaid yet, but if it's not, it absolutely should be. And I actually think that it's a huge bias if it's not. But I mean, that's just my humble opinion.
Yeah, and natural cycles, according to the law, should be covered by health insurance. And we're working, it's easy to say, and sometimes you have to like push a little bit to make it happen, but we do see many of our users do get covered by their health insurance provider. And we've been working also with other programs like the Title 10 to be available for women without health insurance as well. So yes, I think indeed, like providing access and affordable access is so important. Also, this is one reason why Natural Cycles is $120 a year, including a free thermometer. It's still affordable compared to many other methods if you don't have health insurance, and we want to keep it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of, if you are watching this, you're going to get a special discount on a year membership to Natural Cycles, which is amazing. If you just enter the code perimenopause15 at naturalcycles.com, or you can go directly to the App Store and download the app and use that code. I imagine you could probably use it right there, or maybe you just have to use it on the website.
I think you have to use it on the website.
Use it on the website. Okay, so use it on the website. You can go to the website from your mobile device. It is such an amazing tool. And we have women, doing a type of HRT where sometimes we change the dose a little bit, especially in perimenopause. We may help them to get that day 9 to 12 kind of estradiol bump so that it actually triggers their own LH surge and supports their own ovulation to be healthier, helps with that follicle recruitment in the follicular phase. And so part of that is really having such a nice cadence and knowledge around what day you're on and what that day is supposed to feel like, right? And how maybe a hormonal transition may be sort of heightened in perimenopause, or heightened because we're, playing around with dosing and customizing a dose of hormone replacement. And we love the platform for tracking those symptoms, because someone can just pull up their chart in the office with me or virtually and say, okay, on day 12, this happened, and on day 13, this happened. And then I did have a temperature rise, but it didn't happen till this day. And it's just, it's made my job as a practitioner so much more satisfying because I don't have to do as much digging. Like, they're coming in really prepared with information. And it's not like, well, it was like last Saturday. And there's like real specificity there to the interaction that we're having and the data that we're bringing forward. And I just think that, like most things, when you have a population that's really empowered and motivated to be a part of their own journey, like then the system has to change. And so if every woman was using this technology and bringing it to their provider and saying, like, I know I'm in perimenopause because look, like, I'm not ovulating for the last 7 years, ever since I had my baby, I've been ovulating around the same time within 3 or 4 days. And now it's not happening until day 17. And I feel like a crazy person on day 27. Like, these are really helpful pieces of contextualized information to share with your provider. And it should be a shared exchange, and we should all be learning, on the journey. So any final words for the audience, Elina, regarding, like, knowing that this is a perimenopause audience, sort of in terms of, well, you can just also give them like some hope, because I think everybody here is looking for some encouragement, but any parting words about the use of the technology or just the journey in general?
Well, I think like probably by coming here, you've done the biggest step. You're probably more informed than most women around there, and you know what's going on, and there is hope and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there are ways to improve your symptoms. So I think keep sharing, like share with each other, share with different forums and what's going on. And I think women talking to women and sharing their experiences and not shying away from these topics is the most important thing.
Amen. So fun to be talking in the Perimenopause Revolution Summit with a revolutionary in women's healthcare. We're so grateful for your time and attention, and to everyone who's still listening for all of your time and attention today. Thank you so much, Dr. Elina.
Thank you.